Hello, second years. Happy New Year. Hope you have a good 2021. We're going to be working today on the conclusion part of your research document. As you'll see, this is in a gold font. It's an element of the distinction grade. If you do it really well, that'll guarantee you distinction, really. And the idea is you try and now sort of intelligently try to pull together the four genres that we've been studying, try and work out what the key differences between them, the main ingredients, and generally write a nice, intelligent conclusion to all the work that we've been doing. So I'm going to treat this piece of paper here a bit like I would the whiteboard, so be prepared for some bad handwriting and a legible kind of script, but at least then you've got a visual record as well as me nattering on in the background. So we'll start with jazz, seeing as though that's the earliest of the styles. If you had to kind of pin jazz down to two or three musical elements, what would we go for? Well, I think there's that sense of swing. The fact that we're playing in 4/time or 1, 2, 3, 4, but you've got that little skip, that jazz quaver feel that you've got all the way through most jazz records. And remember, a jazz quaver is essentially kind of like a triplet, but with a middle beat missed off. So there's a big key ingredient, having that pulse at the heart of everything you do. Equally, I'd be tempted to kind of mention something about the walking bass. The fact that most jazz music, certainly the jazz that's played in the swing style, will have that pulse beneath it, where you've got essentially a counter melody played on the bass. What other things? Well, the thing that kind of certainly to maybe white listeners initially when jazz came out was that sense of dissonance, the idea being that you've got blue notes, particularly the third and the fifth. Those notes where even if we have a major chord, there's a C7th with it's essentially a major. Over the top of that, you might have a note played which is dissonant. There's a flattened third, would give the effect of this. And maybe a note might be where we hear that flattened fifth, blues note, which is a devil's note. So there's three key kind of ingredients of jazz. Other things that you might want to kind of quickly make a mention of, jazz was the first kind of popular music format, so lots of jazz work has that A-A-B-A structure. Remember, 8 bars of each section adds up to 32 bars, and it gives us our kind of song format that we use in popular music. Other two of the little things, as a genre, you hear a saxophone or a trumpet or a piano, they tend to be the lead instruments of jazz, and bass, drums, guitar, vocals to a certain extent are subservient. A lot of the big band leaders, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, were piano players, and lots of the smaller band leaders were sax and trumpet players. So you talk about Louis Armstrong as a trumpet player, Miles Davis as a trumpet player, John Coltrane as a saxophonist. The stars of the genre were often horn players or piano players. And because of the piano influence, the other thing that you're getting in jazz is that use of kind of extended chords. Not just a straight C chord, not just a straight C7th necessarily. There's a C, there's a C7th, but maybe there's another note added to that to make it a 9th or a 13th, or a slightly dissonant version of the chord with kind of flattened notes put in, like a augmented there, or even a diminished chord. Kind of extended chords that add a bit more harmonic colour. So there's some stuff on jazz. Remember, historically, we're talking about jazz being, a genre of the 20s, 30s and 40s. As we go into the 50s, some of that influence gets carried through to a new genre that became known as rhythm and blues. And certainly, to a certain extent, three of those things are shared. A lot of early R&B has a swing feel to it. There's lots of blue notes in rhythm and blues music, so there's nice overlap there as well. And you'll hear that walking bass in kind of R&B music, especially the kind of triad sixth. But as we go into R&B, there's a move towards more kind of riff-based music. In jazz, the idea is you keep kind of adding interesting musical ideas and keeping it fresh every 8 bars. But in rhythm and blues music, we get riffs that we're going to hear a bit more repetition, maybe some simpler riffs, because essentially R&B was a commercial format. It was a term given by the music industry to music made by black people that was getting in the charts. So R&B is just a bit more commercial, so therefore we'll expect more repetition, more use of kind of hooks, simpler formats. Lots of early R&B music was essentially just 12-bar blues, with a vocal hook that's repeated lots of times. We're moving into a genre that is led a bit more by vocals rather than the instrumentation. What else have we got? The R&B stands for rhythm and blues, and from a blues side, that's certainly where the guitar becomes the more dominant instrument. The idea being that a lot of the stars of R&B, a lot of stars of blues were guitar players. If you think Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, John Lee Hooker, people like that were bringing the guitar into prominence. And the guitar becomes perhaps more likely to be the lead solo. So whereas in jazz, you maybe have some changes and a saxophonist will be playing over the top of it. Now we've got a fixed kind of riff. And when we go into the solo, you're much more likely to hear B.B. King or Chuck Berry. And single string guitar riffs as well. Jazz tend to be a bit more chord based. But as we're moving into the era of electric guitars, the guitar naturally has more power and can sing out loud, just like the saxophone and trumpet used to do. Another little sub point in blues music, pretty much the only music in these 4 formats where you're going to hear a harmonica as a lead instrument as well. And let's look at the R side of R&B. You know, we've got commercial music, and as fashions change, we're moving to maybe straighter rhythms. Certainly when you're getting into the era of Motown, not swung rhythms, straight rhythms, the standard kind of. And the backbeat certainly becomes a thing of this era. Hearing that snare drum, perhaps double with tambourine on 2 and 4, becomes the essence of R&B music. A final little ingredient that has some overlap with reggae is there's that gospel influence in rhythm and blues music, and that idea of vocal call and response. Lots of those Motown records featured kind of a lead singer with 2 backing singers, comes from a sort of gospel tradition, and that's certainly something that feeds into reggae, particularly with artists like Bob Marley. And if you remember, there's some overlaps with reggae anyway, because all these things were repackaged by ska musicians in the 1960s, where the Jamaican music industry were trying to copy some American hits, so they were getting their musicians to copy some of the ingredients. So you'll get kind of riffs played on the bass and the guitar. It's a straighter rhythm. You'll get some call and response vocals. You'll get some hooks and things like that. So we're starting to kind of cross over a little bit into reggae as well. Now, at this key point, round about 1966, 68 definitely, you've got artists who were working in the jazz format. Jazz is becoming less fashionable. You've got artists working in the R&B format, and some people felt, black musicians were feeling that maybe in some ways R&B was selling out to a white audience. Certainly that had been the business aim of Motown. And there was this move to kind of, let's make things slightly more African sounding. Let's kind of celebrate our African roots as musicians. Let's not pander to commercial appeal of the white audience out there. Let's kind of play some things that now are harmonically less kind of less focused on harmony and melody and more about groove. So groove starts to dominate as opposed to harmony. Let's have some 1 chord or 2 chord jams. You know, some of the examples we've listened to is a 1 chord kind of feel all the way through. If we're going to have some vocals, let's make them more like a chant. Let's find something that we're going to repeat and chant and almost not sing. And as therefore, funk music becomes essentially the starting place for hip hop music. The idea that the vocalist can almost talk over a groove. And it's not to do with melody so much, it's more to do with the rhythm of the words is the key thing. Certainly if you listen to James Brown and people like that, it's more the kind of staccato rhythm of the words that's as interesting as the melody line. And if you looked at the melody written down on a piece of paper, it'd be fairly kind of monotone, be one note kind of groove. What else? This is also the kind of era when suddenly bass and drums and percussion becomes equally as important as guitar or horns or keyboards or anything like that. You can have a song which is based on a bass riff all the way through, or a drum groove. James Brown's Funky Drummer, essentially a breakdown where we get 8 bars of just the drums by itself. And this idea that you can have a breakdown, a little moment where just the bass and drums are heard and they get their spotlight. Funk music, a bit like reggae, so there's an overlap there, was one of the first genres to kind of make use of the fact that we're moving towards an LP format, 12-inch records. So we don't have to fit everything into one side of a 45. We could have a 10-minute groove with loads of interesting layers of instrumentation and breaking the groove down, because we're moving into a format where LPs are being bought more than singles, and we can have longer, extended kind of instrumental kind of jams. Another thing that if we had to pin it down to a musical idea, for me, I think funk is about the 16ths and about beat one. Lots of funk musicians talk about how important it is to really accent beat one. The idea being that most of funk music has this feel beneath it. Those 16ths might be broken up, you might not accent every bar, but the one beat, the boom, that beat one has a real kind of accent to it, and that allows the kind of groove to fix in. The 2 and the 4 might be slightly more ghosted now. There's more funky kind of drum patterns going on. The snare's doing all sorts of grace notes as well. So it's not just about the 2 and the 4 being hammered on, like on Motown records, for instance. It's the 1 played on the bass with a strong kick drum. Boom. 1. And the other thing about funk music that it shares in common with reggae music is this sense of maybe there being a slightly more socio-political kind of agenda on the table. Funk music was celebrating black culture, and often lyrically they're dealing with issues that overlap with black politics, black pride, the Malcolm X kind of idea that you should take ownership of your culture and celebrate the Afro elements of black culture. So you've got songs like Say It Loud, I'm Black and Proud, or Moving Up by Curtis Mayfield, and this sense that you can express your political opinions through a format. That certainly wasn't the case in early R&B, because that would have hindered commercial success if you had a song that was kind of dealing with politics too overtly. But funk music, celebrated that, as did reggae music. Lots of Bob Marley's records have a political agenda, and the other thing that you bring into the table with reggae as well, it overlaps with a religious sort of feel as well, because the Rastafarian religion also celebrates the African kind of idea that maybe Jesus Christ had come back in the 20th century, and he was born in Ethiopia, and the Rasta is the true Lord. Rastafarians basically believe that the second coming had already happened in Africa, and that is the Holy Land, and that there should be a return back to Africa, and that will bring some sort of religious solace as well as a political kind of pride. So we move from beat one being emphasised in funk music, a key thing, 16th feel, into reggae, where suddenly, where's beat one gone? We've dropped it. Perhaps the key thing with reggae music that defines it more than the other three genres is the fact that it's not American. Reggae music is a product of Jamaica, a peculiar kind of socio-historic background, different to American society, where there's elements of kind of Spanish tradition and English tradition, as well as the African traditions. And whereas beat one's important in funk, that's ghosted in reggae music. Lots of drum rhythms in reggae, the kick drum's not played on beat one. And the key thing rhythmically in reggae music is that skank. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Offbeat. 2, 3, 4. Counted it wrong originally. The idea being that we don't play on the 1, 2, 3 and 4. The chords fall in between those beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the skank can be a single kind of note, as in ska music, and be a double stroke, as in reggae. But remember, Bob Marley's taken a lot of inspiration from funk music. He's spent some time in America in 1968. He's heard people like James Brown. He's been inspired by them. So reggae does have some of that kind of the syncopation of funk, some of the kind of textures of funk. The bass and drums become really important. They have breakdown moments in reggae. The idea that being also reggae music, a bit like funk music, was using some of the kind of new technology of the 70s as we move out the 60s into the 70s. So spelled technology wrong. There we go. So you'll have moments where you've got those dub mixes where you've suddenly got deep reverb added to the drums or the guitar. You've got wah-wah guitars on the funk and reggae formats as well. So use of new kind of studio kind of effects as well, like wah-wah and echo and deep reverbs. You're going to hear that a bit more in funk music and reggae music as the technology develops. But the skank, perhaps the key thing of reggae music, the idea being that the chord accents don't fall on the beat, they fall in between. And because the beat one's ghosted by the drums, the bass again has that kind of prominence, a bit like in funk music. The bass can fill that space on beat one and get a bit more dominance. Pretty sure that gives you plenty to talk about. The other thing, remember that most of you are also doubling up this coursework related to the improvisation unit, and you can maybe kind of work out yourself which of these genres are geared more towards kind of improvisation. Certainly I would have thought jazz and funk are relying a bit more on the instrumental skills of the musicians. The fact that both those formats give instrumentalists a chance to kind of show off their skills, and there's an element of each take could be totally different. As you go into R&B though, that becomes slightly more commercial. There's elements of improvisation in how the singers deliver the lines, and there's elements of improvisation for little sections where there's maybe an 8-bar section where a guitar player can perhaps stretch out and show off what he can do. But they don't have quite the same looser format as jazz and funk. Similarly, ska is the slightly more commercial side of Jamaican music, where they were trying to produce pop hits, 45 singles that will sell and be played on jukeboxes and on the radio. Whereas reggae is kind of more in that kind of funk pattern of looser jams, longer kind of mixes, and a looser format that allows more space for musicians to flourish in. So, do a good section on that, write up what we've been thinking about there, take your time with it, express yourself, as they say in the world of funk music. Let's finish on the express yourself riff. Played very badly. See you soon, take care.